Let's go back to Israel, where authorities have asked the U.S. for explanations after it was revealed that the NSA spied on Israeli leaders from 2008 to 2011. Now, this includes then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and Defense Minister Ehud Barak. Israeli Intelligence Minister Yuval Steinitz said this: "The tracking after prime ministers and defense ministers is not legitimate and not acceptable to us. There is an intelligence alliance between the United States and Israel at an unprecedented level, and we are sharing the most sensitive intelligence material." Now, espionage between Israel and the U.S. has been a sensitive issue since the Pollard affair in the 1980s, when former civilian intelligence analyst Jonathan Pollard was sentenced to life in prison in 1987 in the U.S. for spying for Israel. Now, since Pollard's conviction, Israel has promised not to spy on the U.S. Daniel, with all of this in mind, the Israeli government was very angry at U.S. officials after this was revealed. But is this really unprecedented?
I would say that, first of all, we need to look at this entire thing within a broader context, that Israel and the United States are probably, the usually very strong relationship is probably under its greatest test yet, given the disagreements over how to handle the Iranian issues. So you have to think of all this stuff within that context. No, it's not unprecedented. And I say that because if you look at the Israeli reaction, this went on for days. This stuff was released days ago, and the Israeli government basically kept mum for a good amount of time. And there's a reason for that, because there's a whole history. I mean, in Israel, it's almost widely known that the United States spies here. There's even counter accusations and things like that. There have been numerous scandals and accusations by American intelligence agencies of wrongdoing by the Israeli Mossad and vice versa, of sabotaging each other's operations and things like that. There's this whole history, even though on the surface, both countries obviously tout the special relationship, which is still pretty much in place. But I would say that the delayed outrage is because it has to be in context with keeping everything warm at a very fragile time right now in the region.
Right. Well, with that in mind, this is from a local Israeli news site, but they're quoting the Washington Post. This was just a few months ago. Israel, a top target for U.S. spying, leaked documents reveal. Now, they're citing the documents that Edward Snowden revealed, but the Obama administration apparently views Israel as one of the top spying threats facing its intelligence services. This is, of course, many years after what went down with Pollard. I mean, this secret budget request that was obtained by the Post showed that the Obama administration lumps Israel alongside Iran and Cuba as key targets for U.S. counterintelligence efforts. So is it really that surprising that the two countries, for as close as their relationship is, are spying on each other?
No, it's not. And you have to understand that Israel is a key player in the region. It's a key player in terms of regional stability. So you obviously, if you're an intelligence gathering body, and I'm speaking very objectively, of course, if you're an intelligence gathering body, you have to stay one step ahead and understand what the major players are doing, regardless if they're an ally or an enemy. So it does. I mean, and if you think about it, Israel has all sorts of regional aspirations. There's things that are being dealt with. Israel's a technology leader. There's dealings with China. There's all sorts of other things that Israel is doing, developing operations that it's pursuing, and it's only natural for an intelligence body to want to stay on top of that. The question is how effective were they?
Right.
And in my opinion, I wouldn't be surprised if the answer was not very.
Right. No, certainly. And, what's interesting is the piece quotes Georgetown University Paul Pillar, who retired as the National Intelligence Officer for the Near East back in '95, as saying spying on Israel's behalf could give Israel warning indicators before any public decision and enable the country to perhaps have the U.S. Reconsider some policy decisions, which is, as you're pointing, very timely, I should say, in light of what's happening with Iran and the nuclear deal, even though we know that the U.S. had consulted Israel beforehand.